In this awesome version of Luc Besson's future, everything is fine except for the documents. Forget those pieces of paper, because right now, while conspiracy theorists are looking for a connection between Bill Gates, 5G, and the coronavirus, documents of the future are already being developed. The project is called ID2020, and it operates under the auspices of the UN under the control of leading multinational corporations. Why do we need a digital passport, and what sweet benefits do its creators promise? Some say this technology makes it possible to turn every inhabitant of the planet into a digital slave. Is it really so? Does humanity have a chance to stay free? What does the Rockefeller Foundation have to do with this project? What questions we asked the creators of the ID2020 project, and what answers we received? Watch our special investigation till the end, and you'll find a big surprise. Fasten your seatbelt, let's go! You probably heard the words ID2020. Especially if you accidentally entered some conspiracy theorist channel looking to find out how the planet Nubira influences Trump's hairdo. Though there's not much serious information about the project. So what is ID2020 and what is its main idea? In short, this is a public-private nonprofit initiative, supported by the United Nations. It plans to provide all people on the planet with a digital ID by 2030. A new platform will be created for this, the experimental version of which is planned to be completed in 2020. Using blockchain technology, it will integrate all existing record-keeping systems related to identity cards, allowing users to access their personal data wherever they are. Biometric data is read through fingerprints, voice, face, or iris. This creates a unique identifier that uses several security protocols. This identifier is recorded on the blockchain, which acts as a table of contents with links to all applicable data. This makes it easy to find, access, and share information without revealing the user's personal data. By combining biometrics and blockchain, the project is working on a system that will be convenient, safe, and protected from counterfeit. At least, according to the creators of the project. Roughly speaking, ID2020 is a digital analog of a passport. A kind of identification tool that contains your name, surname, date of birth, tax code, medical history, internet search templates, online shopping templates, and so on. Why the latter? One can only guess. Probably it was more convenient to buy bazookas on the darknet. For the digital ID to work, it must be associated with the anchor, which will verify the authenticity of the identity, thereby ensuring the security of use. Now we know what ID2020 is. Although you may have a question, why is it needed? At least for the simple reason that without a piece of paper, or a piece of plastic, you are nobody. You'll not be sold alcohol and not released abroad if you do not have documents, and you're in deep trouble should you happen to lose them. But what if you never had any ID at all? Believe it or not, there are more than 1 billion people in the world who do not have documents confirming their identity. 1 billion people. A seventh of the Earth's population. Invisible. These people can't get an education. They can't use bank services. Can't get medical help. Can't leave a country torn by war. For the system, these people simply do not exist. And how to solve this truly global problem? You can't hand a passport to everyone. For example, refugees who left their country without a birth certificate and a diploma of education would be able to provide evidence of the existence of these documents using the ID2020 system. It would seem a great idea and an incredibly good deed, wouldn't it? Undoubtedly. However, another thing is interesting. Why, and most importantly, who needs it? Who benefits from it? We'll talk about it in a second. In the meantime, we will reveal those who profit if you subscribe to our channel and click the bell. First of all, we will understand that we're working not in vain. Secondly, you will receive cool content about technology, the future, and science. Win-win! Let's see who's behind the development of this breakthrough idea. Hey, some serious guys are gathered here. Microsoft, Accenture, Cisco Systems, and PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC. Transnational giants in the field of digital technology, telecommunication software development, consulting, and auditing. The founders also include GAVI, Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. Recently, Mastercard has also joined in. Well, and as we said above, all this happens under the auspices of the UN. ID 2020 is associated with the so-called Agenda 2030, the UN project to eliminate poverty worldwide. The Sustainable Development Goals are formally recorded in transforming our world, the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, which contains 17 global goals and 169 related goals. And if you really read into this document, there's an interesting point in Goal 16. By 2030, provide legal identity for all, including birth registration. It's not surprising that the ID 2020 received such a response and support from the UN. All this sounds very exciting, doesn't it? What grandiose humanistic tasks this project solves. A whole billion people will finally be able to enjoy all the benefits of civilization. But this coin also has another side: surveillance and total control. Wait, what? Yes, although ID 2020 looks like salvation from many troubles, upon closer examination, it may turn out to be an alliance of the largest companies and government agencies that pursue completely non-humanist goals, at least according to the opponents of ID 2020. And although their arguments may smell of conspiracy, probably 5G towers have already processed them with the brain liquefying rays, they're still worth exploring in more detail. One of the most important founding members of ID 2020 that we haven't mentioned yet is the Rockefeller Foundation. Yes, the one that's accused of being a part of the secret world government. Established in 1913, the Rockefeller Foundation was the primary funding vehicle for the charity of Standard Oil billionaire, philanthropist, and sadly not Iron Man, John D. Rockefeller Sr. Sounds relatively safe, until it goes into the territory of human experiments. Between 1946 and 1948, researchers approved and funded by the United States government intentionally exposed over 1,300 people in Guatemala to sexually transmitted diseases without their informed consent. Orphans, inmates, psychiatric patients, and prostitutes were deliberately infected with syphilis and gonorrhea to determine what drugs, including penicillin, worked best in stopping the diseases. In many cases, patients were not offered treatment for the resulting diseases. And who do you think funded this research? The lawsuit of 2015 alleges the Rockefeller Foundation funded and employed scientists who monitored the Guatemala experiments. While the foundation declines any involvement whatsoever, there's still a chance they're hiding something. Reptiles for government, anyone? As of today, the RF is one of the world's most influential global health agenda setters, not to mention its influence on education, development, and agriculture. And it's a no-brainer the foundation is so interested and currently deeply involved in digital ID endeavors. The main driving force of any project is, of course, not massive corporations and government agencies. It's people. Let's get to know those who actually pull the strings. Dakota Gruner is Executive Director of ID 2020. She graduated with honors from Brown University in Providence, California, with 2 degrees in biology and political science, and worked as a management consultant at Oliver Wyman, an international consulting firm. But in ID 2020, Dakota came from, surprise, surprise, GAVI, where she worked as an advisor to the CEO. You correctly noted that GAVI placed far from the last role in the Alliance 2020, and this is no accident. GAVI is a public-private global health partnership whose goal is to increase access to immunization in poor countries. GAVI includes governments from developing countries, the World Health Organization, UNICEF, the World Bank, research and technical institutions. And the founder of this partnership is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Here, it's necessary to reassure those who've already grabbed a chair to throw at their screens, suspecting Brainframe of spreading conspiracy theories. We're Brainframe, not Fox News, so take it easy, Donald, and don't rip your hair off. There's so little of it left. So, here it is. The ID 2020 does not work with embedded microchips, but is falsely accused of participating in bogus plans claiming that Bill Gates supports mandatory vaccination and the introduction of microchips or quantum dot tattoos to patients. ID 2020 was mentioned along with false statements about Gates and COVID-19 in tens of thousands of social media posts, videos, and memes that reached millions after a crazy community of conspiracy theorists began to share them. The The theory of the connection between ID 2020 and COVID-19 has also attracted the attention of, for example, QAnon alternative, and most likely alternatively gifted right-wing conspiracy proponents of 5G telecommunications and chips. For example, Alex Jones, probably the country's most famous conspiracy theorist, falsely claimed on an InfoWars website that a pilot project related to ID 2020 inserted microchips into homeless people in Texas. Apparently, Alex misunderstands the word biometrics. That is, if he understands human speech at all. Once again, ID 2020 is not engaged in chipping. But this does not mean that there are fewer questions for the project. Although the goal of ID 2020 project is formulated mainly in humanitarian terms, Alliance partners share the belief that identity is a human right and that individuals must have ownership over their own identity. It's also a project on security in a broader sense. This is manifested in the level of interest that the project received from the banking sector and various security-related stakeholders. Their goal is to study ways of scrutinizing everyday activities, financial transactions, access to social services, etc. Thus, the introduction of a digital ID no longer looks like a gesture of concern, but as a manifestation of control and marketing promotion of high technologies. In fact, you should be wary of using vulnerable groups, such as refugees and the poor, to promote the ID 2020 project. The system is, in any case, based on supervision and control, even if it is unintentional. There are many historical examples, the most striking is Nazi Germany, that taught us a bitter lesson about how identification systems played an important role in facilitating group classification and acts of genocide, as well as in making people easily identifiable for deportation, detention, and even execution. Do you think this cannot happen in our bright, progressive time? Ha! Throughout the world, it's quite possible to outlaw undesirable groups of people. All you need is to foment the agenda in the media and declare them enemies, exposing each of their actions as a crime. You yourself will be surprised how quickly you'll believe it and start to hate people you don't even know, simply because they showed you the right shots and added the right descriptions. What's next? Well, firstly, for the benefit of the majority of enemies, it's not a sin to track them with the help of the same ID 2020. Although, why track them if you can do even better? Just disconnect them from the system. And in an instant, they become nothing. They cannot receive education, medical care, or police assistance. A tempting prospect? Write in the comments what you think about this. By the way, in contrast to the above, the creators of ID 2020 argue that people themselves must have full control over their digital identities, including how personal data is collected, used, and sent. Sounds great, but we kind of control our personal data on Facebook and Google, right? Then why is it you can just say something about cat food with the phone lying next to you, and it starts to helpfully show you cat food advertisements, and you don't even have a cat? Our other concern is related to the very essence of the ID 2020 project, namely, how to ensure legal identity for all. Many people mistakenly assume that everyone on the planet is already queuing for digital IDs and only a system is needed. This assumption ignores the fact that some groups, nomadic groups, remote tribes, gypsies, etc., do not want to join the ideology of legal identity. In fact, the lack of an official identity may be convenient in certain circumstances and for some individuals and groups whose identification may do them more harm than good. The fact is that this assumption supports the very idea of a government mechanism that reduces people to numbers in a database or a piece of identification paper, without which a person becomes nobody. And this is precisely the problem. The growing emphasis on legal identity may well lead to a strengthening or even creation of further forms of exclusion. The topic should be reformulated in such a way that it calls into question the supremacy of legal identity rather than confirms it. Instead of asking how to ensure legal identity for all, it's necessary to raise the question: how to separate access to relevant services and programs from the tyranny of legal identity. Thus, access to basic rights, such as education and healthcare, does not depend on birth registration and identification documents, but is based on the simple fact of existence. In other words, everyone should enjoy rights regardless of the lack of legal identity. It's high time for man to free himself from the legal and political fetters of personality and the rule of law. Indeed, identity has long been a powerful tool of state control. And most importantly, ID 2020 risks becoming a part of the problem instead of its solution. On the other hand, such a system would rule out the possibility of fraud. For example, when citizens from the Middle East came to Europe under the guise of Syrian refugees. And there were some cases when 30-year-old bearded men presented themselves as 14-year-old school children in order to receive a scholarship somewhere in Sweden. And the European authorities believed them because they, lost documents, and it's not necessary to undergo medical examinations to confirm age. We don't want to sound like we're into conspiracy theories, because we're not. And we do not believe that ID 2020 came up from a secret government of reptilians that want to steal our souls. However, while working on this video and following the precept of George Carlin, question everything, we could not help but ask questions. We decided to address them directly to the creators of ID 2020. We've contacted them via email and all their social network accounts. You see these questions right now on the screen. What sources the base is or will be formed from? What is the guarantee of the accuracy of this information? How will it be checked? How will the data be protected? Will the criminals use the ID 2020 system to reformat a personality, with all the ensuing consequences? Who can guarantee the collected information will not become an opportunity to gain control over the entire population of the planet and manipulate it or its individual layers, peoples, groups, etc.? Is there a guarantee that the founders will not use the data in their own commercial or other interests? Who will have full access to the data? How exactly can users control the way their data is used? Where does this data go after a person dies? How much will it cost to implement the ID 2020 system? Will it be possible to refuse digital identification? We think that not only they're thought-provoking, but also important. Alas, we never received an answer to any of them. What's the reason? Maybe the questions turned out to be too uncomfortable, or the ID 2020 community manager is just lazy. This question also remains unanswered. It seems like not. Or yes, or not. We cannot say that ID 2020 aims to take over the world and make some kind of digital concentration camp. At the same time, concerns are still present. Few people want to be closely watched, justifying this with safety measures and ease of movement. What do you think? Are you ready to be connected to the global identity system? Can you live knowing that every step you take is recorded and verified somewhere? In the meantime, we will continue to educate you and try to make the world a little clearer. Remember, always think outside the frame. Brainframe out.